you have 2 end portals and 1 stronghold in Bedrock Edition, and our axes really stronger in Java, and these are 51 Java versus Bedrock myths tested to see if they work. Our first myth is that hidden villagers apparently doesn't raise the prices on Bedrock Edition. Well, they clearly don't like it on Java, but if we go over into Bedrock and try it out, surely enough, as much as you punch the mob, it'll never raise its prices. Alright, this says that lily pads are thicker in Bedrock Edition. Now, there's a couple of different things that this could mean. Are they talking about the hitbox, or are they talking about the physical model? But the truth is that neither of those seem to be the case. And if we look at it off to the side here, our lily pads show as no thicker in Bedrock than they do on Java. Do Bedrock Edition fishing rods have more durability than Java Edition? Well, it'll take a little while to test, because we're only able to view the actual durability exactly on Java Edition. There's unfortunately no debug menu that we could use to see it over here in Bedrock. But if we look at the relative amount of uses, there's hundreds more that we're able to use on the fishing rod in Bedrock Edition than we're ever able to see on Java. You can have 2 end portals and 1 stronghold in Bedrock Edition. Now, the reason this myth might exist is that Bedrock Edition strongholds generate very differently than how they do in Java. Here, the strongholds can generate randomly throughout the world as long as they're 160 blocks away from the world origin. But in Java Edition, there actually is a specific limit of how many strongholds we'll see, that being 128, and they'll all generate in rings outward, making sure that none of them overlap. But in Bedrock Edition, while it's extremely rare to happen, there have been seeds in the past where there have been 2 end portals generating between 2 combined strongholds, meaning that while technically it is 2 strongholds, I'd say visually this myth's confirmed. On Java Edition, the axes are stronger than Bedrock Edition, and while we can test that out, it is actually easiest to see by just looking over and seeing how much damage is listed on the item. On Java Edition, our stone, iron, and diamond axes all do the same amount of damage, which is more than any of our swords. But in Bedrock Edition, they're much weaker, meaning that over there you're just better off using the sword. This next myth says that ender pearls throw the exact same in both editions. But if we go and check this out, not only does it throw differently, but on Bedrock Edition it ends up being much further, meaning that it could be possible that you could easily clutch with an ender pearl in Bedrock Edition where you can in Java. Does staring freeze an enderman in both versions? Well, we can test this out in Java and see that if you lock eyes with the enderman, while it will get angry, it won't actually attack you until you look away. But in Bedrock Edition, as long as you locked eyes, it's gonna come after you. When you rename a campfire, it'll show the name on Bedrock Edition. And so if we take a campfire into an anvil, give it a name and place it down, sure enough, it does render the name on top of it. But in Java, because the block's considered differently in the code, nothing actually shows up over here. You can't even break the campfire to get back the named version. While water and redstone doesn't mix in Java Edition, is it true that you can waterlog repeaters on Bedrock? Well, sure enough, we can place any of these redstone components underneath the water in Bedrock Edition, and they'll function as expected, which for someone who's used to playing Java, this just looks so cursed to me. Our next myth is that entity cramming doesn't exist on Bedrock Edition, and what that would mean is that while in Java Edition we can only have 24 mobs in a single block space before it starts to apply extra damage to another mob, in Bedrock Edition it actually doesn't matter. There's not even a game rule that exists for this. It's truly a Java exclusive feature, so I guess don't expect to get squished if you're playing on Bedrock Edition. This myth says that Guardian laser beams are different colors in the different versions. Well, if we place down a Guardian and then get it angry, we'll see that they actually do show up in different colors, which is the kind of discrepancy that I would never expect to see. I don't know why you wouldn't just reuse the texture across both. And I guess on either version, I'm not exactly excited to get targeted by a Guardian anyway. If you hold down the right-click button, it's possible to water bucket clutch easily on both versions. Well, if we get up to a tall height and then get our water bucket in hand, this is gonna work on Bedrock Edition, but unfortunately for us on Java, it all comes down to timing, which is a pretty brutal reality, meaning that it's easier to both bridge on Bedrock and save yourself if you fall off. This myth says that our dispensers are less accurate when they shoot out arrows on Java Edition than they are on Bedrock. While I'm pretty sure that this was true, it has been changed in the code, so let's give it a test. And as we can see from this discrepancy, it actually turns out that our dispensers are more accurate on Java than they are on Bedrock. When you press space again while flying with an elytra, it'll actually disable it while playing in Bedrock Edition. Well, as you can clearly see on Java, no matter how much I'm pressing the space bar, it's not actually going to disable my elytra. And thankfully so if you need to enable it in a pinch. But on Bedrock Edition, if you don't stop after that second space press, you're likely to just fall off the cliff that you just jumped off of, which is pretty brutal. When you place sand on top of TNT, it can make it explode underwater. Well, this is a trick we've definitely shown off in the past working in Java, and there, it works great, but I'm curious to see how it works on Bedrock Edition. And the truth is, how it works on Bedrock Edition really depends on the setup that you have. Since if we just light it off in the ocean like so, then our sand will actually push the TNT out of the way. But if you ignite it in a tube of water that's 1 by 1 like so, where the TNT can't slide out of place, then it will actually explode underwater. So I'm gonna say partially confirmed, but I'm leaning towards saying busted, because it definitely doesn't work in an exciting way like it does on Java. By setting up the right amount of TNT and redstone, you might have seen this video where they show off making a heart-shaped pattern using TNT. And while it's definitely true on Bedrock Edition, there's there's a reason you're only seeing those videos over there, because as soon as you try this trick on Java Edition, you're gonna be left with a lot of explosions, but not as much love. The next time that you go to eat food, pay attention to the first person arm, since this myth says that you're able to see your arm while eating in Bedrock Edition, but not in Java. And as you can see from this comparison, it's false, because we can't see it on either version. At least we can't see it in first person. And I think the reason this myth might exist is that if you go into third person, you can see the arm eating animation in Bedrock. It just doesn't happen at all on Java. So while that might be a fact, this myth's still busted. While you can waterlog a bed in both versions, is it possible to sleep in that waterlogged bed? Well, on Java Edition, it definitely is. And in fact, it's actually a safe way to get away from mobs that can't swim down to find you inside of a lake. But if we try it on Bedrock, we can definitely place it down here, but we can't actually sleep in the waterlogged bed. This myth says that cookies can kill parrots instantly. Well, if we right-click them with a cookie on Java Edition, we're definitely going to see that's the case. And while I thought that's what would happen on Bedrock Edition, it's a little confusing. Since sure, it does still kill the parrot, but instead it applies an effect called Fatal Poison that takes a little bit of time to kill the parrot, as opposed to what we're seeing on Java, where it's just a right-click and it's done. Can you place torches on honey blocks? Well, some transparent blocks can be a little weird for this, but as we can see on Bedrock Edition, it is possible to fully place torches on side of our honey blocks. However, for those of us in Java, it's not possible, because while a honey block doesn't look any smaller than a regular block, it's treated as if you can't place anything on it because it sinks in 1 pixel on each side. So this myth's a partial confirm. When you go underwater in both versions, it's said that it's brighter in Bedrock Edition, which if we go ahead and give that a shot, we can dive under deep and see with this side-by-side comparison that it is in fact brighter in Bedrock Edition. However, it is true that in Bedrock Edition, we have a lot more watercolor maps to look through. And so while it might be brighter, it is also going to be a little bit murkier if you're ending up in some kind of swamp water like so. If you build up a wall with magma blocks, it'll stop spiders from climbing. And if we give this a shot, they can climb in Java Edition, but in fact, they do actually stop the spiders on Bedrock, making a solid wall if you want to defend your base. You might just also hurt yourself in the process. This myth says that you can name your items in 50 character lengths on both versions. And while it's clearly false on Bedrock Edition, that does end up being the case on Java. And funnily enough, the reason it had to be the case in Java is because there used to be an item that was added into the game that had a name so long that it actually wouldn't have even fit if you used it in an anvil after the fact. And that was the waxed, lightly weathered cut copper stairs. This myth says that you can waterlog rails on both versions, which was a later addition on Java Edition, but as you can see here, it does work on both, since only on Bedrock Edition are the rails going to be broken by flowing water. Do lightning rods turn white when struck by lightning on both versions? Well, with the help of a channeling trident or a lightning storm overhead, we can see that in fact it'll only light up this way on Java Edition. This myth says that dogs can only eat seafood on Bedrock Edition, and while this might have only been true for Bedrock in the past, as you can very clearly see, you can feed the dogs on Java the same way anyway. The heart damage particles that you see when you hit a mob only appear on Java. Well, let's test that. And not only does this only work on Java Edition, but as an added fact, you can also count the amount of hearts that come off of when you hit a mob and see just how much damage you actually did. So if you see 7 hearts, it means you did 14 points of damage. This myth says that we can use doors to save ourselves from drowning on Bedrock Edition, much in the same way that we can on Java. And while you might look at this footage and think that it's working, that's only because flowing water stopped by our door. And in fact, as you can see here, if we were to place down these doors in any kind of solid body of water like the ocean, then you're still gonna drown down there. This myth says that Bedrock plains biomes have less grass than in Java Edition. And while I never thought I'd have to take up a hobby in counting the amount of grass that I'd see in plains biomes, it is clear to see if you look at both examples side by side, even if I'll never understand why this would be a discrepancy. Did you know that Steve blinks? Well, apparently that's only true on Bedrock Edition, and it makes sense that the version with the marketplace would actually have some kind of animated textures that we've never seen on Java before. This myth says that super flat worlds don't exist on Bedrock Edition, which I can understand where this myth came from, because for such a long time, it was actually true. Though thankfully, in recent years, we've seen that Bedrock Edition actually does have super flat worlds in its versions. Apparently, you can only craft spectral arrows on Java Edition? Well, that's true, but it's not just because there's only a crafting recipe in this version, it's because spectral arrows don't even exist in Bedrock. I mean, I'm not gonna lie and say they're the most useful item, but not even existing over here? That's something I didn't believe. This myth says that banner patterns don't work on shields on Bedrock Edition. Well, we can attach them on a crafting table in Java Edition, even if the banner does look worse on the shield. But if we give it a shot on Bedrock, it does actually work nowadays. A common myth is that both Java and Bedrock players can't play together on the same server. And while that's true in the vanilla versions, through the help of special server plugins, it is actually possible. Which I wanted to mention just because I think it's such a cool feat of the community that we're able to even bridge these two versions, even if you have to do some digging into finding out the right way to do it. This says that compasses work in the Nether on Bedrock Edition, but they don't work in Java. And when we bring our compass through with us to the other end, you'll see that it's not going to point us in the right direction on either version, which makes sense. Mojang wants to make sure that you're actually using the lodestones for this purpose. I've heard that iceboat racing is broken on Bedrock Edition. And while it's definitely one of the fastest ways to travel on Java Edition, thankfully it also seems like it works very well on Bedrock Edition too. If it was broken in the past, it's definitely not now. Will villagers sleep in the Nether on both versions? As was shown off in the past, villagers are able to sleep in beds in both the End and the Nether on Java Edition, but when we set up a bed in the same situations on Bedrock, they also sleep there as well. On Bedrock Edition, if you throw an item at a bell, it'll actually ring, which when we tested it out, it is definitely true and definitely weird. Obviously not the case on Java Edition. You can use Silk Touch to pick up the Pathland block, and if we grab our Silk Touch tool and break down the padded grass, we can pick it up, but only on Bedrock Edition. A classic myth is that water breathing can keep fish alive on land, which as we've unfortunately shown off in the past, just does not work on Java Edition. But let's give it a shot on Bedrock Edition, and sure enough, it actually does keep the Bedrock Edition fish alive. Apparently there's no sweeping edge for Bedrock Edition, and when I hear this it sounds ridiculous. But sure enough, trying to enchant a sword or searching through the enchanted books in the creative menu, you're never gonna find sweeping edge. It just doesn't exist in this version. You can ride a skeleton horse without a saddle. Well, on Java Edition, this just isn't the case for us. But on Bedrock, this does actually work, making it a lot easier to get your skeleton horse if you find it in a skeleton horse trap. I've heard that nether stars can never despawn on Bedrock Edition, which would be a real plus considering that on Java Edition and older versions, the nether star wasn't even blast proof. So there was a very real possibility that your nether star could get blown up by a last tick wither skull and you'd lose it even after killing the wither. But on Bedrock, it's somehow even better because our nether stars will never despawn in this version, regardless of how much time you wait for it. And after having to go through all the effort to kill the wither on Bedrock Edition, I think it's worth it. If you drink milk on Bedrock Edition, it can't keep you safe from the Elder Guardians. Well, it definitely can remove the mining fatigue, but you'll just gain it right back because on Bedrock Edition, there isn't any cooldown on the way that the Elder Guardians work. Whereas in Java, it's likely going to be set up to a 60-second delay. Can fire aspect swords light candles? Well, our flame bows can, so let's give it a shot. And strangely enough, not only can fire aspect swords apply this to our candles in Bedrock Edition, but also fire aspect enchanted books. This says that snowballs can light on fire in both versions, which if we get down to snow golem or throw out a few snowballs of our own, you'll see that in Bedrock Edition, it does cause the snowballs to actually pass on fire to other enemies, making your snow golem into a whole flamethrower. But on Java, while there is visual fire on the particles, it doesn't actually transfer over to the mobs. This myth says that you can bone meal sugarcane. Well, it definitely doesn't work on Java, but on Bedrock, it's completely true, which for someone who plays a lot of Java, this is just so cursed for me to see, but also incredibly useful. I've never looked at it, but apparently baby villager heads are bigger on Bedrock Edition, and as you can clearly see from the side by side, it is definitely true. Although after seeing how dumb villager AI is, I doubt it's because they're any smarter. Apparently, Bedrock Edition lets you use a regular pumpkin to make a golem, and while I've seen examples of this being true in the past, in recent versions, it doesn't let you do it anymore, and you're gonna need to carve pumpkin like we do on Java. According to this, snow layers aren't a gravity-affected block, which is definitely what I've seen on Java Edition, including these incredibly strange sites of world generation where snow layers can generate floating in the air, but in Bedrock, as we show off like so, it does actually fall to the ground. When you rename a bucket of an axolotl, it'll also name the mob inside. Okay, let's give it a shot. And while this doesn't work on Bedrock Edition, as you can very clearly see here, on Java Edition, it does actually place down the axolotl with the same name. And with that, folks, YouTube thinks that you might like this video, so see if they're right and have a good one, alright?